Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Ainsley Freeman and I am from Olive Tree Media, and it is our privilege to bring you today's discussion on To the Ends of the Earth and how do we get there in a global pandemic. We are privileged today to be joined by academic and missiologist Ed Stetzer alongside Karl Faase, who's the host of Jesus the Game Changer and CEO of Olive Tree Media. Karl and Ed will share about ministry and mission in 2020 and beyond, bouncing out of the last words of Jesus in Acts 1:8. But you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. But before we welcome Karl and Ed, let me give you a bit of a rundown on today. Soon we're going to watch the trailer for Olive Tree Media's second season of Jesus the Game Changer, which was titled To the Ends of the Earth. Then Ed is going to share, and following that, there will be an opportunity for Q&A. So please, as he's sharing, don't be shy. Throw your questions in the chat. We'd love to hear your questions, and Karl will present them to Ed after he shares. We'll also hear later on from 3 Australian church leaders. Leonie Wright, Jessica Brouwer, and Tim Lovell will be joining us. Finally, we have an exclusive offer from those of you who've come and joined us in the webinar, so be sure to stick around from that. You won't want to miss it. But let's get started with the trailer for Jesus the Game Changer Season 2. Here we go.
The spread of Christianity across the centuries is a remarkable story. From a backwater in the Roman Empire to become a truly global faith. It transcends cultures, social classes, language, and ethnic groups.
The question we should ask is, what did the people who were most close to Jesus do after his ascension to the Father? And the answer is, they went on mission.
Go and preach the gospel. Make disciples.
But what compelled ordinary people to face difficulty, danger, and even death to take the message of Jesus to the ends of the earth?
Is this idea of going where the gospel is not yet.
I was living in darkness, and Jesus' bright light to my life.
The ends of the earth is Jesus' way of saying no one is exempt.
When you know that Jesus loves you and your sins are forgiven, you can't help but share it.
Jesus the Game Changer to the Ends of the Earth follows the movement of Christianity around the world, telling some of the great stories of vision, faith, and sacrifice.
Our plea for the church in the West is never to give up this faith that we are dying for in Africa.
It will take some cost.
Are we really bringing the whole gospel in a way that is salty and light-bearing?
You know, Christianity, in the face of persecution and opposition, has actually taken this message to the ends of the earth. As people have talked about the life and teaching of Jesus, it's become a global game changer.
Difference is dissolved. Christ has come to the whole of humanity.
The true missionary activity is not to find people who've never heard of Christ, but to go to the places where people have known and forgotten.
Now, it's our time.
Well, we want to welcome Professor Ed Stetzer to our webinar today. And let me just do a quick introduction. You will notice that Ed was on our trailer. We interviewed him for Jesus the Game Changer Season 2 in Wheaton College. And he's a professor and dean at Wheaton College, executive director of the Wheaton College Billy Graham Centre. He's been a church planter, and that's his website tells us is his heart in ministry. He has 2 masters, earned masters, and 2 doctorates, earned doctorates. Ed's clearly an underachiever. He's authored books, written articles. He writes for Christianity Today, USA Today, CNN, and others. and he has a national radio show that's on every Saturday. But he's here with us today, and we're looking forward to him sharing about taking the message of Jesus to the ends of the earth and how to do that in a pandemic. Ed Stetzer, welcome to the webinar.
I think Ed is coming. He says he can't hear anything at the moment, so he's hopefully coming in very shortly.
Just to let you know that we did interview Ed for Jesus the Game Changer Season 2 at Wheaton College. It was absolutely freezing when we did it, but it was a wonderful moment. We had a great moment where we did a walk into the Wheaton College Billy Graham Centre, and we had the drone going, and Ed and I walked up to the door, and when we got there, the door was shut. It was a fairly unimpressive moment, which didn't actually make the cut. Ed is here and ready to start. So, Ed, thank you.
Well, my apologies. It appears that I needed to refresh my browser. We're not actually allowed to have certain things in the United States right now. We're not allowed to have nice things. It has to do with a lot of the government. Anyway, you don't want to know all the details, but it is good to be with you and to share with you. And so thankful for the good work Altitude Media is doing and the team here. And thanks for your patience while I refreshed my browser. So let me share with you. Here we find ourselves. We even at the beginning, this global movement that is Christianity starts in the backwaters of the Roman Empire with a conquered people called the Jews. And the good news of the gospel is not just an idea, but it's ultimately a person. Jesus dies on the cross for our sin and in our place. God raised him from the dead on the third day. And something happens in the minds of those first followers of Jesus that they're willing to risk everything. It's a game changer, right? So it's a game changer for them. And the end result is that they then go on mission around the world. It's a fascinating trajectory of mission that you can see. Acts 1:8, which we mentioned earlier, is something of the unfolding, if you will, of the book of Acts itself. Jerusalem and then Judea, which is, of course, the region around Jerusalem, but also has an ethno-linguistic significance as well. People from Judea are the Jews, and then to Samaria, which is not, as you know, the region that surrounds Judea, but rather it's kind of the people nearby that you don't like or you don't want to be near. You walk around so that they are not there, and then ultimately the uttermost parts of the earth. So here we are now in the uttermost parts of the earth, and yet here we find ourselves at the uttermost parts of the earth in the midst of a global experience different than any of our lifetime. Most of us are in our homes. Most of us are distanced in more, and depends upon where you are. You are well aware, if you follow the news and read a website now and then, that around the world, different nations are faring well and poorly, often based upon how they respond to this crisis. But here we find ourselves in a situation that I'm going to talk some about in the crisis, and ultimately how the gospel is going to be at work in the midst of some of these things. Let me share my screen so you can follow along with me, and I'll share as we go. So here's some of the things that I think is a reminder for us in the kind of the state of the situation. Hopefully, let me just check and see to make sure here that you're seeing what I want you to be seeing. I think you are. Hopefully, you're seeing that screen. Just move my chat over here. Good. So we find ourselves, sorry, that's just my opening slide. I'm Ed Stetzer. I serve at the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center. But the kind of environment that we're in is what often called a VUCA environment: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it's actually a term that comes from studying of crises and even warfare around the world. Perhaps on, when we look at Remembrance Day, a reminder that these situations can face us. And now it's become something that people use regularly, kind of describe the moment that we're ultimately in. And so here we find ourselves in a very complex environment where really entire structures are under question, are being questioned right here. A study came out today that pointed about 5 areas where the most spread takes place and one of them mentioned is congregations. And so here we find ourselves, the very thing that brings us solace and life is in some cases the very thing that has actually driven some people to fear and concern. So then the question is how do we respond to this? Now, there's a lot of research. I actually did a whole course, MOOC, a massive open online course, on these ideas of crisis and how we lead through a crisis. And typically what we find is there are actually four ways to ultimately lead through, 4 phases of a crisis. And I'll just go through those phases with you and for you. Phase 1 is the phase that, depending upon where you are, continues in many ways, right? So it's the pause and pivot. We find ourselves sort of stunned by the initial reaction. And right now, some places are still there because of protracted lockdowns. Like, okay, what do we do? Well, you have to get out of that phase, and the vast majority of you here have done that, but not everyone. Some people are just still unsure. But pause and pivot means we ask the question, okay, let's take a moment, let's stop, let's see the crisis, let's see how we might address it, but also recognizing that some of these limitations or restrictions are the seedbed for innovation and creativity. I'm going to talk about in just a bit. Depending upon how a crisis unfurls, there's actually 2. What most literature talks about is a incident crisis and an issue crisis. An incident crisis is, just a few minutes ago here in where I live in the outside of Chicagoland, we had a tornado watch. And when a tornado hits, it's a crisis, it's over. That's the incident. Issue, sort of an issue crisis might be when your church is on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald for whatever reason it may be. And that can have ramifications that go there for a while. So we get to phase 2, where depending upon the crisis, we can prepare and plan. We ask questions like, what needs to change? How does it need to change? And who needs to lead the change? Because I want us to say that when it comes to continuing this mission, right? When this comes to continuing this mission, that with trusting the Lord, Jesus as the game changer, the advance of the gospel, that the moment we're in must not pause the mission we are on. Now, depending upon your theological tradition, this is a harder experience for you. If you have a low ecclesiology and you're, just super flexible, and man, we can meet online or we can do whatever we need to do, then this is easier to weather. But if you have a high ecclesiology, what do you do now? And this is why churches and ministries all around the world, churches first are adopting a temporarily deficient ecclesiology for the sake of the mission in this moment. And that's what it means for us to be flexible, for us to acknowledge that the nature of the turbulence and tumult we're in requires us to have some change, right? And to walk through some of that change as well. Kevin, I see that question. I'm happy to give you these slides, but you gotta check with Karl. He's the boss. Don't ask more questions and distract me though. So let me move back on. So we got to ask some questions to help us through that, which leads us to phase 3 of the crisis, which is actually going to help us to think about engaging and executing. We've got to still ask, how do we get back on mission in the midst of the turbulence and the tumult? And there's key ways to doing that, right? This is engaging a higher level of communication, a higher level of delegation, clearer sense of management and flexibility. In any crisis, these are going to be attributes that we're going to engage to help us through this crisis. Now, why does that matter? Because ultimately, what happens in a crisis, there's 4 authors at the Harvard University School of Incident Management, and then they wrote a book called You're It, and they explained that what happens is in our mind is we go to rooms, they call them. We might say floors, right? The bottom floor is the basement. Is that in a crisis, we all go to the basement, right? Sometimes literally we go to the basement, depending upon what the crisis is. But also intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, we do. And we saw that. We saw that in the early phases of the lockdown. We saw, people react in different ways in Perth or Brisbane or wherever else we may be. And people sometimes reacted in ways that were more rational, sometimes not, because people weren't sure. And then what follows that is we get to keeping in mind like 3 floors. Think of the basement, and then the first floor is what you might call the workroom. And that's where most of us are now. We're asking the question, how might we continue to thrive where we have significant reduction or access to public gathering in our facilities, right? So then we've kind of gotten to that place, right? Most of our ministries have found new ways to engage donors. Most of our churches have found new ways to engage our congregants. We've gotten to the work room. But here's the reality. One of the things that you would really, I think you'd love with Jesus the Game Changer is Karl actually looks at how the Christian faith over all these centuries has actually thrived. And again, there's even phrases that people use that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, which isn't always historically or statistically accurate. But here's what we know. When difficulties come, the gospel of Jesus Christ is actually advanced by people who find ways around those difficulties. And that leads to the top floor. And that floor is the laboratory, right? So we've got to get out of the basement. Most of us already are. Then we get to the workroom. That's where most of us are. We got to get to the laboratory. And it was interesting, even watching that bumper, what I saw was what I assumed was, and again, I don't know the geography. Karl would know it better, but it sure looked like one of the monasteries that were evident in the spread of the gospel around the world after the fall of Europe to barbarian hordes, right? Groups like the Vandals, whose name we recognize today in our own vocabulary, who came in. And Christian Europe, the Europe which had been Christianized, we might have some pushback on what those things ultimately might have looked like, but Christian Europe had fallen, and in the midst of the fall, the faith itself was lost. These invading tribes, we might better call them than barbarians, these invading tribes brought their own religion, often animism or some other form. And what happened was Christianity was often pushed up into mainly places like Ireland. There's actually a famous book, a significant Irish population there in Australia, but a famous book called How the Irish Saved Civilization. And lots of things in there, some of which are fanciful in their telling. But here's what's not fanciful, right? That ruins of that monastery that we saw a minute ago in that flyover drone, those were the places where the gospel were launched from. People like Columba and Columban, who launched missions that would go up into ultimately Iona, and then from Ireland, Iona, and then from Iona back into Europe. In other words, when the entire continent fell, and the process of seeing the gospel retreat, God was at work. God wasn't done. God had a plan. And what I would say is, as the whole world has experienced a kind of a shocking reality that the number one way in which we have worked or gathered or done even our evangelism, most people come to Christ because someone invited them to church, and all of a sudden, inviting somebody to church is not a great access point for a lot of people. So if that's the case, how might we look at this moment? Well, that's part of the question we're asking literally right now. If the gospel is going to be advanced, it's going to be advanced by people asking key questions, right? Let me show you again. The gospel is going to be advanced by people asking certain questions. What needs to change? How does it need to change? Who needs to lead the change? And then moving forward into the next phase of that crisis, which is ultimately working through the change. And finally, till we get to what I call phase 4, which I'm just tracking and following. I'm just putting Christian religious terminology on top of what is best practices on crisis management. But to recover and reemerge, we all saw the news of potential vaccine. We all saw the opportunity for a light at the proverbial end of the tunnel. Good news all around the world. But the reality is we've got a ways to go to get there. And churches are going to need to, and ministry are going to need to think through some things over the next few weeks and months that will help us to be ultimately prepared for what is still an ongoing, not yet done crisis. And I think that's important for us to remember, right? So let's take a look at some of what that might mean. We need to think through to be more effective in ministry and mission, practical stuff like, how do we communicate to people? What does that look like? finances have been shifted, and it's different in different places. I've not seen a lot of research out of Australia about the financial reset, but that financial reset is pretty prevalent around the world. What does that mean? Early on, we saw March and April, significant drops in giving, and then some recovery, but really depends a lot on where you are and the kind of ministry you're engaged with. But, finances, what does that mean? How do we build that out? I'll put these on the screen, but remember, I'm going to share these with you, so you'll be able to share those as well. But all ministry models are being rethought. So I'm the interim teaching pastor at a church in New York City. And I was at the Moody Church, for some of you familiar with the Moody Church because of its impact in media and more. But I'm the interim teaching pastor at a church in New York City. It's actually fascinating. It's actually right near Central Park. So think of the CBD at Sydney, right there in the middle of it all. But I was just struck by this. I was recently there with them. I'll pull up just a picture of the church to give you a feel for that. So I was recently there with them in New York City, and I'm going to rely on this trusty, faithful, you can always believe Wikipedia around the world. But so this is the church where I serve as the interim teaching pastor. You can see it's on West 57th Street. Right behind it is what I call the super tall condos, some of the tallest condos in the world. But don't miss this right here. This building that Calvary Baptist Church has had since Stephen Olford was the pastor and before is now pretty much useless. It's inaccessible. It's not legal to gather in. And so the very thing that would give the stability, is ultimately now an albatross in many ways, right? And we don't know at what time we'll get there. So what are churches doing to move in a more positive direction? Let me share some things that I think will help with that. And here's some ways that I think churches are advancing the mission. A greater external focus, right? A key thing is a greater external focus, right? Turning their attention outward. And many of our churches have not been engaged at this high of a level for a very, very long time. And so I think I'm encouraged by what I see as a greater engagement in mission than we've seen before. And so that's, praise God for that. But that's not all, right? So we also can see some of the shift in utilizing technology, right? Wow, what a shift. I mean, even this gathering with, we gathered, a bunch of people where in the past we wouldn't have been able, people wouldn't just be open to this. They wouldn't come to these kinds of conversations. But now it's almost normal now. Grandmas are jumping online with Zoom, and it's changed. And so it gives us opportunities. Facilities are having to be leveraged in ways that are still to be determined. We still have to see how that shapes out. Small groups, right, have become a greater sense of mission opportunities and ministry and more. And also, again, restructuring finances. These are all realities as we sort of seek to move forward with the mission. So but let me encourage you when it comes to these issues that sometimes people ask me, they'll pretty constantly say, Ed, what's the future hold? And I don't know. I'm not a prophet. I'm not the son of a prophet. I work at a nonprofit organization. I don't know, but many make big predictions. They might say predictions like, the day of the large church is over. What does that mean? The day of the large church is over. Because here's the reality: for 2,000 years, we've had hundreds of epidemics, and depending how you count them, many pandemics. And the Church of Jesus Christ has walked through, weathered, and came out the other side. So I don't want us to miss this, right? Because we actually know, and by now, I can't go through it. Everyone's given the plague example, right? I wrote in our national newspaper called the USA Today of the example of Eusebius and the 4th century plague that swept through the empire, and the Christians stayed and served and ministered. And I quoted Eusebius's description of the work in the 4th century plague. And it said this, that the Christians, quote, deeds were on everyone's lips, and they glorified the God of the Christians. So we've all told a plague story, plague of Cyprian or Black Death or something during this, even though we would acknowledge that this is not at that level, and thank God for that. But what I would say is that people will often ask me, what's it going to be like when we're through this? And the answer is actually probably a lot like it was before we started this, because here's why. If we've had hundreds of epidemics and however many pandemics, within a year or two, the church has tended to revert back to its practice before. So actually, for me, I'm actually, and you might find this intriguing, or maybe not, but I'm actually more concerned that we would take the lessons and the learning, the Great Commission and Great Commandment opportunities during this time, and not seek to return to normal, but rather we might ask the question, what's a new normal look like? What does a new normal look like? What can we do to move forward and say, for example, things like, what can we do as a church to be indispensable to our community? What will it look like to lead well in the crisis? After the crisis subsides, what we want to have been known for? How can we bring flourishing to our community during this crisis? What will it look like to be an Acts 2, 42 through 47 church? And I really want to emphasize this because I think that people, they underestimate the return to the norm that people tend to experience. And I want us not to return to the norm. I was struck by this because at Easter, I was speaking to an empty room at the church where I was finishing up serving as interim, the Moody Church in downtown Chicago. And the Moody Church is this wonderful, beautiful, cathedral-like facility that's probably it's unique. It's hard to describe. And it was empty. And I thought to myself, what will happen? I mean, what does this mean? And as I looked at Paul there, I remembered that Paul Rader 100 years ago spoke to the same congregation in the Spanish flu, which had a much higher mortality rate and more. And they kept on mission, and they showed and shared the love of Jesus. And therefore, we have to ask similar questions. What will it look like for us? How will we be faithful to what this looks like in God's mission? And so I would, again, ask some questions about ministry and mission, right? That's the question that Karl asked me to address. How will this COVID-19 crisis futuristically change the way we do ministry and mission? How will it change the way we gather together? I think you can always assume from now on that there's going to be an online component in the way there wasn't before. What does that mean for our next generation? What does it mean for children and families and more? How can we move from a sole reliance on tithes and offerings? How can we leverage technology? There's 100 questions that we could ask. And particularly as we think through what will probably be an accordion-like reemergence. I recognize that in Australia, the lockdown is ongoing and pretty particular and severe. What we found is when we open that we have to close again. So my county here where I live, we've had less than 1,000 deaths, but many illnesses, but 600 plus deaths in this county. And we were open, and now we're closed again. So we're now limited to meetings of 10 or more. So these things go back and forth. And actually, one of the things that you'll get in this PowerPoint that Karl and the team will share with you is some of what this looks like in this reemergence, right? So how might we think about this when we talk about reemergence from the crisis? This is something I did for U.S. churches and easily can be replicable here. What does it look like to kind of go back and forth between a family church, a house church, less than 20, a cell church? These are not my languages, by the way. This is from the Hartford Institute for Religion Research. So at the end of the day, here's what I would say. I've read the end of the book, Jesus wins. So I know that, and I can be encouraged by that. But we're still in the midst of a global crisis. It's going to have significant and ongoing ramifications for ministry and mission for at least the next 6 months and more. I was recently on a call with Dr. Francis Collins, who's some of you would hear Dr. Fauci's name in our world. That's Dr. Fauci's boss, and Dr. Deborah Birx, and talk some about what this means. This does not mean once there's a vaccine that we all go back to normal. So we're talking for months in maybe our current state, and beyond that, even what that might look like long term. So I think we need to start asking the questions. Back to my picture, not my picture, but we got in the basement. We're in the workroom. I think a lot of us need to get into the Great Commission and Great Commandment laboratory, asking the question, how do we do ministry and mission effectively and fruitfully as we move forward through this crisis and to the other side of this crisis? I love some of the ways Olive Tree Media is helping us think about some of these things, some of our other partners. And so I'm going to wrap up my talk and turn it back over to Karl and to Ainsley and continue our conversation so we can see where they want to take the conversation from here. But I hope that's helpful. And again, we'll get you the PowerPoint as well.
Ed, that's outstanding. Really helpful material. I love that comment about pause and pivot, that this is the seedbed of innovation. And that's a wonderful statement. And you rightly picked up, that wasn't quite Ireland, but it was Lindisfarne, the drone shot. And Lindisfarne was actually, came out of Ireland through Iona and into Lindisfarne. But, that period of time was a time that really needed a great deal of innovation. And it was a time of enormous crisis for the church, but it actually had a great positive outcome for mission globally. Let me start off with a question. You said we'll come back. I'm interested that you were saying we'll come back a bit like where we've been. That's a very interesting statement. I'm not sure if that's encouraging or depressing.
Yeah, I agree.
To kind of lose one thing out of what we were doing last year, what would you like us not to be seen doing as we get into the year?
I think we've had a very long time an over-reliance on the gathered worship expression as the tool of almost everything that takes place in the life of the church. This is where teaching takes place. This is where evangelism takes place. And what I would say is, when in high school I played competitive chess, which if anyone knows me, they're not shocked by this nerd fact in my life. And one of the ways you want to learn to play chess better is to remove the queen, because what happens is, like, inexperienced chess players, if you play chess, the queen's like the most powerful piece on the board, zipping around, so your queen's going over here, taking this knight, going over here, taking out this rook. And what it does is you don't learn to deploy all the pieces on the board. Well, my one hope is that when we're on the other side of this, because again, the most likely predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So in the dozens of pandemics we've had, some of which literally took place in for example, in the Middle Ages, in cathedrals, where they met before they built cathedrals, they met in cathedrals during plagues, and they met afterwards, and they all knew, they didn't know about virus and exponential, transmission vectors, but they knew, get close to people, get sick, and yet they continued to do those things. So my hope is that this greater deployment of all God's people that we've seen, which is, they never had the opportunity of technology like we have, but the technological deployment, but just the general deployment that all of God's people functioning in God's mission is something we want to continue. Let's not lose that. Winston Churchill was famously, he famously quoted a lot of things he didn't say, but we're pretty sure he said, never let a crisis go to waste. And one of the things I would like to see churches all across Australia is that ultimately they might be engaged in a greater sense of mission for God's glory and for greater use of God's people.
Yeah. And Tina wants to know, in the laboratory stage, what do you see coming out of the laboratory stage at the moment?
Yeah, so several things already. Sorry, we have that. It's that joyous delay that we always see on television news that we sometimes not sure the other's done. Couple of things. I think ultimately the engage right now, and again, I know that's not the same phase you are. Right now, in some of the states, they're engaging in having public worship again. And what's happening, the questions that we're all asking is, all right, what does it look like to engage a significant population that's not here, when our old way of doing it was basically a camera in the back, and that can't be that anymore. So, for example, that church in New York City, we can't use that building, but under significant police supervision and with the permission of the health department, we were able to have a meeting, and about 20% of the people came 2 weeks ago. We had to meet, we rent a 2,000 seat hall to be able to put no more than 150 people in it, so we had to follow, and everyone's seated apart. So now when you're in a room, you're still primarily talking to people who are not in the room. That's a change in the way we do things. Innovation in evangelism. Alpha has been seeing some significant positive impact on online alpha groups, which is so significant. Can people have these kinds of conversations if they get more comfortable? Like I said, grandma's on Zoom. People are getting more comfortable these kind of conversations. Everyone knows supposed to look at that little button right now, not to look elsewhere. So I think those are things that can lead us for opportunities for the future.
Yeah. Tim is talking about 28% of the world, or 2 billion people, out of a particular piece of research, are unevangelized. Is that something that we as a church should continue to focus on? Is there a danger of us worrying so much about, whether we can meet next week and how we do that we actually lose sight of the global picture?
Well, that is a good question, but might I say, is a different presentation. It's this presentation here. And the answer is I'm just going to say a couple things. How do we prioritize global missions? I think absolutely. I think right now we would be really, think about here we are on, Remembrance Day. It's Wednesday there, right? It is Wednesday in Australia. Okay. And we think about the sacrifices that Anzac forces made and more. And that's not unfamiliar, right around the time where we had Spanish flu. And all kinds of people were sent out as global missionaries during the Spanish flu. And, I had a call with 200 missionaries in places I can't even mention, the 1040 window, none of whom came back. So we need to recognize that the assumption that we would have a disease-free, Zoom back home existence to global missions is an assumption that the church didn't have for 1900, 2000 years. So I would say we need to ask that question, and Tim, it's a good question, Tim. So for me, if you want to talk about, I'm the dean of the School of Mission Ministry and Leadership. We want to talk about how do we help missionaries and mission pastors and more engage UUPGs, unengaged, unreached people groups, and more. So what I would say is this is not the opportunity to say, let's just put a great reset because we might send out a missionary in the midst of a global pandemic that has a 99+% survivability rate for people who without, other conditions and all those sorts of things. So yes, Tim, thank you for your passion for global missions. That's not the full totality we're focusing on today, but certainly a heart of mine, and literally it's the other presentation I had sitting on my desktop so I could pull it up easily.
I want to ask you one final question because we're over time with you, but people are clearly enjoying what you've got to say. So thank you for staying on. It's actually a question from Nicholas, which will be our last question, but we're talking sort of theoretically about what the church should do and be and all that sort of stuff, but there's a personal element in all of this, and that is how do you cope? A lot of pastors before this hit were struggling to cope with just being a leader within the church. Now they're trying to cope with, well, how do we pivot? How do we change? Have you got a couple of thoughts from what you've seen about how people cope personally during this?
Yeah, so one of the things that we actually saw was a great need was actually the idea of resilience in leadership right now. I've never led in a harder time. I've never struggled more. I've never experienced this kind of ongoing sense of weariness and anxiety. And I've never actually gone backwards before in things that I've led. So all these have been things that have been a challenge for me. So we actually kind of got some folks together and created something we call the Resilient Church Leaders Initiative, which actually is all kinds of resources. Right now it's a very big division, and it's not the same in Australia, but we like to stay divided here. But we've got webinars and leadership resources and more, because we just think that this is a time. We think this is a deadly serious time. We actually think we're hearing suicidal ideation at a greater level. There's actually been a well-known pastor who died by suicide. It's actually not been said what it was, but those of us who are close know. And what I would say is we're going to all have to, this is a long, hard slog. We're going to have to make it across the finish line, but we want to make it across the finish line together. And so I would say let's spend a little more time building in new rhythms. We had to reset everything. Let's build in new rhythms of rest and community in our lives that help us through the long haul.
Yeah. Ed, that's been fantastic. We really appreciate your input, your time, and enjoy Chicago and Wheaton as you head into winter. Just think of us at 30 degrees this weekend. We're going to go on to a couple of church leaders here in Australia that Ainsley is going to introduce. But Ed, we really appreciate your time and thanks for being with us.
Excellent. Thank you so much. What a great note to end on. So I just want to let you know now about the special offer that we are making available to those of you who've joined us for this webinar. If you want to see more of Ed and the other sort of 50 odd interviews that we did for Jesus the Game Changer Season 2 about going to the ends of the earth, how did the Christian faith and the gospel propel out and go to the ends of the earth, and what does that look like now, then we're going to offer Jesus the Game Changer Season 2 on USB, and we're offering it for a low price of $30. So the offer is going to come up in the chat, and if you want to opt in, you can either choose between the USB pack with just the series and the episodes. Or if you're a church leader, you might want to grab the church campaign pack. And on this USB, there's not only the 13 episodes of Jesus the Game Changer Season 2, but there's also a bunch of resources for your church, sermon notes, children's program, graphics, and videos. So when you click on the offer, you'll get to choose between one of these two. And if you opt in for that for $30, we're going to send you a free copy of Karl's new book, The Stuff of Life, Making the Most of the Everyday. So click on the offer sometime between now and the end of the webinar, and you'll be able to jump on and grab Season 2 of Jesus the Game Changer for a low price. So thank you, Ed and Karl. We're now going to be joined by 3 church leaders. They come from different states around Australia. This is not sort of the kind of perfect idea of what mission and ministry looks like, but we wanted to give some firsthand practitioner stories of people on the ground doing ministry and mission. Hopefully it encourages you and inspires you. So the first to join me is Leonie Wright, and she's joining us from Cardinia Church in Victoria. As many of us know, Victoria have come out of intense restrictions. They're on their way out. But while she joins me, she's going to talk to us about what they've done, how they've found it, and hopefully encourage us with some stories that we can hear. So hopefully she's joining us. I've just clicked yes, you can join us, Leonie. Hopefully we'll see you.
Can you see me?
Hello. Thank you for joining us.
Hi.
Well,
Great
why
to
don't you
be here.
introduce yourself and just give us a bit of your story.
Cool. I'm Leonie Wright, as you've just been introduced. I've been a pastor here in Victoria, in Geelong now for over 20 years. We actually have 3 campuses in Victoria. And, yeah, it's just a real pleasure to be here. I laughed at the start, mid-year this year. There was a post going around in social media that actually had well done, Australia, for your great efforts to curb COVID. And it had well done to all the states. And then it got to Victoria and it said, not you, a great big stamp across our state. And I was like, yeah, that's great. We're the ones that are in shutdown and have been a lot longer than everyone else. You know, I've certainly grumbled a lot. I'll be honest. I'm an extrovert. I love to be around people. I've found it really hard to be working from home. And but I'll have to say that I've turned a corner and I've started praising God. I've actually started seeing that God needed someone like me to actually be shut down a lot longer to get through my blockhead. And that's a good thing. Earlier this year, I actually listened to a podcast, and it was before COVID. And this podcast just said a few things. It said it was a lot about saying that we have a lot of pressure on us all the time as church leaders, and those 4 Bs are around, and it was about the 4 Bs, the buildings, the budgets, the butts, and the buzz. And it really hit me, actually. And I might be talking lightly about it now, but it really hit me that it was a huge thing to actually see that we often measure church by these 4 things: buildings, budgets, butts on seats, and buzz. How did that service feel, you know, and all that. But rather, the thing that hit me was, are we measuring right? And should we actually be measuring more on, are we actually making disciples? And I mean by disciples, I mean people who actually live by the fruit of the Spirit and are bearing fruit and are actually making other disciples. Little did I know at the time that those 4 Bs are going to be challenged greatly, so much so that for 8 months we've now had no church services, full stop. But we're still unpacking the measurements now and trying to discuss what this really means. But it's been a huge learning curve, one we're still learning in greatly. We certainly haven't got it all right. We've done a lot of mistakes, but we're navigating through this uncharted territory, and we're adapting actually weekly to changes. We were really fortunate because we actually had church online already, and because we had a really determined production team with a really low budget that made it happen. Because of those who are missing church, also for the fact that we have a huge playgroup ministry and run childcare centres across Victoria, and a lot of people don't want to come to churches and check it out they wanted to actually have a chance to check out church. What's church about? If they've never grown up in church, what's it about? So they could come and have a look at it online. And so we were fortunate with that. So it made it easier for us to pivot to going on straight onto church online full time. But, you know, the reality is now we're sitting there questioning, you know, engagement. We've failed, you know, in all our attempts I shouldn't say we've failed in all our attempts. We've failed in some of our attempts. Too much talking, too long of services, worship in the wrong spaces. You know, we've had everything from huge engagement at the start, like most of the churches across Australia I've heard, and then have dropped really low, but now we're, you know, back on an average consistent engagement. But we're exploring how we can do this all the time. As a church, we've been running prayer and worship nights, and we've had like Alpha, you know, we just heard about Alpha. We've had 70 people do Alpha, and we've seen that they can engage personally online, and people can actually connect to Jesus and connect to other people online, and they don't need babysitters to come to Alpha, and we can run it more regularly. So there's been great things. But ultimately, as a church, we've always said to be bigger and to reach people for Jesus, we need to be smaller. And we've highlighted connect groups, but I think this season has actually made us realise that it's not been a big enough highlight, and that we really need to put a lot of emphasis on this. And so that's what we've just done. We've remodelled and rechanged our whole way we do our connect groups, how we equip our connect group leaders, and how do we actually have a greater connection with all our connect group leaders, and change things up and put connect group leaders into different hubs with an oversight pastor, so there's genuine relationship. And now we recognise that, you know, no matter what the future is, there has been a change and a moulding because of our 8-month shutdown. And, you know, right now we're just sitting there going, how do we equip our leaders? So, you know, our church in some ways, it feels like we're some sort of ministry leadership equipping hub rather than anything else. And we're training others and the people who are doing the hands-on work in connect group leading. And, you know, we've always taught, probably like you, the Engel scale, you know, a journey learning that there's a God, to people becoming, I want to know about this God and take faith to God. And then, but now, and we're saying, well, we're actually the scattered church now. You know, we are the scattered church, and we need everybody and every person to know that they're on mission daily. And that's where our heartbeat is. And in fact, tonight, the greater emphasis on equipping our connect group leaders is that we've actually got Tina Wardrum from Evangelism Australia coming to speak to all our connect group leaders, and just believing that if we can sow more into those, because they are the church. And I love what Ed said about, you know, using that greater use of God's people. You know, we're responsible as leaders to see that people are all using their gifts, and that we are actually making the Great Commission our priority. You know, it's messy. We're in the midst of restructure, but I think it's worth it. No, I know it's worth it. And I just think, you know, to finish up, last year, Craig Rochelle at Global Leadership Summit spoke on Bend the Curve. And he asked us to think inside the box, saying constraints. These restraints have been a great benefit. So we're so excited for what God's going to do. And is it hard? Yep. But is it worth it? Yep.
Thank you, Leonie. I think I'm not sure if it was just me. Maybe we could hear in the chat. Was it just me who lost the last moment of Leonie? You were right on a roll, and I think I missed the last thing that you just said. So maybe now that I can see you back, just...
That's all right. Was it just the Craig Rochelle?
Yeah, just go from there again.
Yeah, so Craig Rochelle at Global Leadership Australia in 2019 actually spoke on Bend the Curve. And he asked us to think inside the box, saying that constraints drive creativity and constraints eliminate options. And obviously, COVID has brought all sorts of constraints. But, you know, looking inside the box has made us find ways to break through and see changes. And, you know, he actually said create restraints. We didn't know at the time that COVID was going to create so many restraints that it would cause us to think and change, to be creative in new ways. And that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
God's in the midst of it. He's changing us. So like I said at the start, I'm so glad that I'm a Victorian, because I think I needed a longer shutdown to get the wake-up call.
Well, I'm glad we got to hear that quote, because that was awesome. That constraints kind of, burst a new kind of center of creativity. And I just thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you for being with us. And I hope it was a real encouragement to those of us who are here. So thanks, Leonie. And we are going to be joined now by Jessica. Jessica Brouwer is from inner city Sydney. She's from an Anglican church that is, she's the missions pastor there, and they've done a whole scope of different Christianity Explored courses and tried to work out how to do ministry mission in 2020. So I'm going to get Leonie, you can jump off, turn your mic and camera off. Everyone wave goodbye to Leonie. Thank you. And hopefully Jess will be joining us shortly. And I'll give an introduction, because after Jessica, we're going to be joined by Tim Lovell, and Tim is coming from Queensland. So we've got the east coast of Australia represented today. Different churches, different contexts, different restrictions that they've had to navigate. So let's just give it a moment. Maybe Tim Lovell, could you jump in? We'll go to you, Tim, and then we might come back to Jessica, because it seems that she's having some technical difficulties.
I guess I'll just start with what our journey has been. And for us, I think for me personally, it started a long time ago. Many years ago, I felt challenged with a question that was simply this: who would care if we, as the church, were forced to shut our doors? And so I began probably processing this because I'm actually convinced that the gospel should affect the way that we live, not just the way we believe or the way that we talk. So many years ago, over 20 years ago now, I began to explore a dream of engaging our community through a very holistic approach to humanity, which is not just being purveyors of the spiritual, but really of the mental, emotional, physical, hand in hand with the spiritual. And ended up being a part of a ministry here, for lack of a better word or a more familiar word to us. And we run a community sports and recreation facility with a church at the heart of that and the backbone of that. And so with this question, who would care if we were ever forced to shut our doors? It really began this exploration of what was our influence or our voice or our impact in our local community. And never necessarily expected it to happen. But as you all know, March 2020 hit and it happened. Our doors were closed. And for us, it left us incredibly exposed on every front. Our whole centre was shut down. We have a gym, we have swimming pools, we have swim schools, we have a cafe, we have our church community that meets in our basketball stadium, and basically shut. So we didn't know what it was going to look like going ahead, but as things eventually began to open, restrictions lifted, we opened some things. But during that shutdown, the whole idea of pivoting and changing what we do and how we engage community, we were forced to face it. So we did things like, what I ended up doing was sort of drive-through pastoring. We went from a staff of about 60 on the ground to 3, and we did drive-through coffee and things from our cafe. But those drive-through coffees became opportunities to sit and listen to people's hearts, to listen to their fears, to give them hope, to pray with them. And so I would just grab a stool and sit about 1.5 meters from a car window and talk about hope, talk about loss, talk about fear, talk about Jesus in the midst of it. And that was pretty different, I think, to how we engaged that. Secondly, we did sort of visitations, but I'll give you an example. We have a fella here that has dealt with a lot of mental health issues and processes his mental health through physical health. And so he will swim laps and then reward himself with a sausage roll if he doesn't enough and this sort of thing. And he'd been on my heart, so I rang him and I just said, look, how are you coping during this time? And he said, not really well, can't exercise, can't get my mind in order, etc. So I went to the girls in our cafe who were doing, or the one girl that was there, and I said, look, and I gave his name. I said, I know that he rewards himself with a sausage roll. What's his coffee drink? And this lass knew it straight away. She goes, long black milk on the side. And I said, look, can you do me a long black milk on the side? Heat me up a sausage roll. I'm going around to see him. And so I took it round to his front door, knocked on the door, and and he just had tears rolling down his cheeks. And he goes, why would you do this? And I said, because you're seen and you're known. And I said, not just by me, but God sees you and he knows you. You're not alone. And this is a guy he's been to church one time at my invitation because I was sharing on a Father's Day thing. And it just became this open door. We had people coming and parking their car and walking laps of the parking lot. And, I went out and I said, look, there are prettier places to walk. And they said, no, this is where we belong. This is our place where we find our meaning. And so we just found that people were verbalizing this belonging in different ways. And this holistic approach, mind, body, emotion, spirit, really came into a new reality that we were able to embrace. And then as our pool reopened, we were the first pool on the Sunshine Coast actually to reopen. We were able to get some COVID things in place. And because we're privately owned, our finance structure was different to the public pools. And we found that we had internationals. We had some international athletes stuck here on the coast. They came for the marathons and got stuck here. Ecuador shut their borders, Australia shut their borders, and these triathletes were here just going, what are we doing? They were swimming in the river, which is shark bait up here. And they heard that we were open and they came, and I leaned in with about the 6 Spanish words that I have, and I just began this conversation. And through a series of about 2 months, where I was able to reintroduce them to some of their roots of their faith by just having a meal together and asking if I could say grace and thank God for his provision. And it really just began to open some doors. So I loved what Ed said before, where he said that we need to make ourselves indispensable to community. And I found that with my church experience, which is 30 years of pastoring, I find that probably a lot of church members can be some of the most fickle, and we're finding that people aren't coming back. They're finding other options. Other churches opened their doors sooner, and they're going back to those churches. And I'm just kind of like, well, that's okay. What I found was we had done the series, and I'm so grateful, Karl, for the series. We had finished the season 2 of Jesus the Game Changer towards the end of last year. And I found the ends of the earth came to us during this season. And I just feel like, if anything, we have to, as Ed said, and I found that very encouraging, we've got to be ready to be open-eyed, open-eared, ready to pivot, make a move, and ask this: how does the life of Jesus impact the way that I live on mission? I'm not waiting for mission. I feel like we are on mission all the time. So that's sort of been our journey. We do an online church with a bit of a difference. We didn't choose to preach to an empty room. We sort of went magazine format. We've done all from homes, and we preach from all over the community. And so it's pretty different, but I'm liking the different, enjoying where we are. So hopefully you've heard this. I can't hear any of you, but hopefully it's beneficial. And if it can begin a conversation of any sorts, I'm always open to the conversation too. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. We did hear him, and it was real. I'm really glad you persevered, because it was really worthwhile hearing that. I think it's a really important reminder that our churches need to become places that are indispensable. Who would miss us if we didn't reopen, or if we weren't there next year, next month? We've got Jessica Brouwer joining us now. She's coming from, hello, here we go. Technology's finally sailing again.
Oh, tell you what.
Thank you for persevering and joining us. Why don't you introduce yourself and give us a bit of your story?
Yeah, well, hey, I'm Jess. I'm here in the inner west of Sydney in Annandale, and we did try to get a bit fancy with all of our, tech set up the back there. But anyway, back to the computer. And so anyway, great to be here. And I think, like a few people have said today, when COVID hit us, it did feel like the game changed. We had to throw all of our plans for Easter out the window just at the last minute, and it was frustrating and it was tempting just to throw our hands up and go, well, we can't do anything. But actually, like Ed was saying, and Leonie referred to this as well, it's such a good opportunity for us to just wipe the slate clean and to rethink, where do we want to be and what will we do to get there? And we do this kind of strategic thinking all the time, but it was kind of fun to have the freedom and the possibility that comes with restriction, because you have to think in a new way and you can't just do what you've done before. So that's certainly been our season this past little while, just thinking of new solutions and new ways of connecting with people with the gospel. And so really I found it's helped us really stretch and polish up some of the strengths that we already had, but also to develop in some areas of weakness and challenge that we had as well. And there are some things that I think are particular for us in trying to save and reach the lost in the inner west. So for us, a particular challenge is that we do live in quite an affluent area. People are self-sufficient, self-made, they're busy, and don't necessarily feel like they have a lot of need. But also, we do certainly have pockets of people with disadvantage and need in our community as well. But I think in both of those spheres, there is a common mistrust of the church and a hostility towards Christianity. And at best, we're seen as irrelevant, and at worst, seen as harmful. So there's some of the barriers that we try to break through in our community as we're reaching out with the gospel to them. And so it can feel like we're ploughing pretty tough ground. And that saying is really true for us, that people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And so for us, we work really hard to try and show our community that we do care. Not just that we want to convince them of what we believe, but actually we care for them and their good. And so that starts on some really kind of just really get to know you level stuff. And for us, COVID has created such a great opportunity for us in that area. It's given us an in, and it's given us new abilities to care for our community with the gospel. And so suddenly, our affluent, self-sufficient, busy neighbours found themselves in a situation of insecurity, in a situation of need. Their lives are really, really rocked. And so, yeah, it was a great opportunity for us to be able to reach out to them in a new way. So people could be, I think, vulnerable in a fresh way. We'd have some of our church members meeting their neighbours and their friends, and it's just, you can kind of level with, this is really tough, and I don't know what tomorrow is going to look like. And, people recognising that, I used to really depend on, the people I love and my job and the place that I live in, my self-sufficiency, but that's all up in the air now. And then for a Christian to say, well, actually, I feel that too. But in Jesus, I have hope and I have a solid rock. And so just to be able to really share of their faith in those circumstances, it was just great to see that happening on a real individual level amongst our church community. And to see Christians laying down their lives for their neighbours in really practical ways. So it meant, for some of us, we actually met our neighbours for the first time. And people, when we could meet in small groups in houses, they could invite their neighbours over to watch the live stream that we're doing for church in a way that just would never have happened before. And we used these viral kindness cards, which were just really handy. People kind of got out in the street and brought them around to their neighbours and just said, yes, I'm here, I'm part of the church in our local community, and I'm here to help, and I care for you. So that was a cool thing. A lot of us went down to the dog parks regularly from church and meeting people there that we probably wouldn't have otherwise been able to connect with on that personal level. So that was happening kind of individually and personally, but also on a kind of a more corporate nature as a church body. We put out this initiative called Community Care. And so it situated our church. We're actually here in Annandale, we're like right in the middle of the main intersection. And so it was just great to have that, community care, we're here for you kind of banner in the middle of the suburb to really situate our church as a place that is here to care for the community. And we had local businesses, they'd hear a lot of the stories like, yes, we're in the inner city, but it still has a bit of a village feel about it. And so people will be sharing about what's going on at the local shop, and they'd say, hey, go along to the church, they can help you out for that. And that's just a situation that we've never quite been able to have before in terms of building relationships with people in our community. So anyway, that was really cool. Things like our playgroup. So we have platforms like Playgroup, which are places for us to connect with carers and parents. Obviously, when they couldn't meet together, because it's quite a large group that we have for Playgroup. So when they couldn't meet together, that community just shifted online to Facebook. And so people would drop around crafts to each other's houses. They would do them during the week and then share about it on Facebook just to keep that sense of community going in a different way. And then when they were able to meet back together in smaller numbers, and outside, we've got a bit of an outdoor area here where we could meet in small groups throughout the week. And so just that idea of going deeper with a few. Some of the relationships where we knew people from Playgroup, but sometimes when it's such a large group, it's really hard to get to know people well. So to go deeper with a few was a really great new opportunity that COVID has given us. And I feel like our relationships have become much more authentic. People are sharing more vulnerably, and then there's more opportunity to just really speak in an honest way about what it's like for us to know Jesus, which has been cool. Like Tim, we've also seen an influx of international people, so people who are stuck here in Australia without their families, without their home community, and just really reaching out for connection with other people. Lots of people from Catholic backgrounds, so that's just been really exciting to have them amongst us as well, and reading the Bible with them, and we're doing Ideas That Change the World, and some of them are coming along to Introducing God. That's been really great. And I think probably one of the advantages one of our strengths that we've been able to develop since COVID is that, apart from my example today of not really getting the tech together, our church has really invested in tech stuff over the years, having this link with Christians in the media, thinking actually if we want to be reaching Sydney, a very media saturated city, we've really got to be up there with the tech and connecting with them at that level. So we have invested a lot over the last decade or so in just bit by bit learning and growing in this area, so that when it did come to the point where we couldn't meet physically, we had been doing a bit of live stream, obviously not on the scale that we needed for fully online church, but it wasn't as much of a jump for us. But we have been able to polish it up a bit more. We've been upskilling a lot of people in our church community to be able to have skills in ministry in that area. So it's been great to see that kind of growth, but also then for evangelism. So easy just to say, hey, on Facebook, my church is meeting now, come and join us, or come and join us for Zoom afterwards. So just for our members to be able to share those online links has just been such an easy in. Our biggest struggle sometimes is just getting people through the front door, just to even check out church for the first time. It's a huge barrier. And so for people just to be able to kind of step through the door virtually online for the first time has been a really great win for us. And it's kind of funny in the sense that, proximity, it mattered, but it didn't matter at the same time, in that all of a sudden your neighbours mattered. So the people who you could talk to over the fence or across the terrace, like the people who were there in your proximity mattered, and those relationships became, really great ground for speaking about Jesus and for caring for people. But also it didn't matter in the sense that we could kind of come to church and be joined by people from China and Germany, and some of them could invite their friends along, and we had an online Introducing God group, and it sounded like Leonie was doing some of that stuff as well. And it just meant that actually, you know, we used to run, when we'd run evangelistic groups in person, they had to be able to get here by a certain time after work and, you know, find babysitting, and it was a big effort to set it up. And, you know, we still work with those things. And yet something about the online group just meant that we could access, or we can invite people that we otherwise wouldn't be able to. And so there'd been a guy who was joining our church from China, and he invited a couple of his work colleagues along to Introducing God. And so it's just really great to have people like that be able to join us online who otherwise we might not have been able to reach. And of course the challenge is then helping them link into local churches in person when they're able to as well. But anyway, it's great to just be able to share the gospel with them in that way. And so just, yeah, I think one of the greatest things, just that easy low bar, step through the door, come check out church. People can let us know online, like they're checking in, let us know that they're here, how we can pray for them. And then the greatest joy, I think, for me is then seeing people who have been kind of joining us online for the last little while. They live, you know, within our area, and then eventually get to a point where I think, you know what, I feel safe enough. I could go there in person. I could meet them now. And because they've been watching us for, you know, however many weeks, when they can't, it is familiar. And so it's lovely to then meet those people in person. Someone sent me an email the other day. She had been just watching on YouTube cat videos, and then one of our sermons happened to just pop up on YouTube after that. And she realised, oh, they're down the road. And so she sent me an email saying she's been working on our live stream for the past 3 months or so. Can she come to Introducing God? And so that was just a really, you know, lovely point of connection. Anyway, that's been really great for us. So it's been a really exciting season for evangelism and connection for us. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica, for sharing. And I love the way that the kind of hybrid model has allowed for people, as you say, to kind of step through the door of our church before they physically step through the door of our church. So thank you. Appreciate you being with us. I'm going to now throw back to Karl. He might give us some final thoughts, and then we'll finish our webinar for today. Thank you, Karl.
I mean, listening to Leonie and Jessica and Tim, it reminds us of all the material that we put together for Jesus the Game Changer 2, to the ends of the earth, which is the whole idea of the gospel going to the very ends of the earth. And it was never smooth. It was never easy. There was enormous challenges. And, you know, if you were to take a word that talked about the gospel getting to the ends of the earth, the word pivot would probably be one of the strongest, because alongside the power of the Spirit of God, the gospel went out as people kept changing and innovating. One of the first books on leadership I ever read was by a guy called John Haggai, and he had a chapter, and the chapter was called this: Your greatest opportunity is cleverly disguised as an insurmountable problem. And that little quote, I've lost the book. I actually tried to find the book. I've lost the book, but I haven't lost that chapter title. Stayed with me all these years. Your greatest opportunities are cleverly disguised as insurmountable problems. And that's where we are in lots of spaces. It's not an insurmountable problem. It's a great opportunity. And thank you to Leonie, Jessica, and Tim, because that's exactly what you've shown us. And thank you to Ed. We really appreciate that you've been with us. And Ainsley is going to wrap this up for us. Thanks, Ainsley.
Yes, thank you, Karl. Well, thank you everyone for being with us. Make sure that you grab the offer if you want to grab Jesus the Game Changer Season 2 and a free Stuff of Life for $30. There will be a replay of this webinar available. And yeah, we thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your comments and your questions. It's been fabulous to get to know some of you via the chat. So thank you.